Okay, this video is going to deal with the basic process that we're going to follow to solve a case, whether it's a marketing case like in this class or any case at all. Really. The most important aspect of solving a case is actually finding what the problem actually is. So the diagnosis part of the problem recognition, it's probably something that it's underplayed. Most of the people try to rush to the solution, and you should spend some time thinking what really is happening. Okay, and a good TV show that it's all at this point, but used to spend, in fact, the whole show is built around this idea. It was this House, right, Dr. House, and what he does is he's a diagnostician. So what he does is whenever there is a case of somebody who is sick and the doctors, traditional doctors, have given up because they cannot figure out what's going on, and some of these cases will make it to him because he and his team, right, were particularly good at this, right? Okay. Now, if you identify what the problem is in that show, after they figure it out, which usually takes the first 35 or 40 minutes of the show that lasts about 45 or 50 minutes, right? So let's say 80% of the show is finding the problem. After they find what the problem is, the solution is trivial, right? They either provide whatever cure is already available, or unfortunately the person passes away because there is no solution for that particular problem, right? Both outcomes are possible, but after you understand what the problem is, solutions become obvious. This is why identifying the problem is so critical. Okay, so what happens when somebody has a particular disease and it gets treated with the best available treatment for a different disease? For the most part, is that it doesn't work, right? So your solutions are only going to be as good as the problem that you have identified and formulate appropriately. If you do not spend the time formulating the problem appropriately, the solutions that you're going to create are not going to address that problem properly. Okay, so it's very important that you actually try to identify the problem. Okay, so remember, you need to make a distinction between what a problem is and a symptom. Okay, so when you go to the doctor and they measure your temperature, or these days when you go to a restaurant, right, and they measure your temperature because they want to know if you have a fever or not, the fever for the most part is not a problem. Yes, it is true, if your fever gets too high, it is possible that you can have serious physical consequences from it, but that is rare. Usually fever is just a symptom. Okay, a symptom is something that happens because there is an underlying cause that is creating that. Okay, so for example, when you see that sales are coming down in a firm, or profits are low, or you have losses, right? Those are signs that there is an underlying problem. Okay, but just low profit is not the problem per se. Okay, or low sales. Okay, and so you need to understand the difference between a symptom and a problem, and make sure that you try to diagnose what the problem is as opposed to just focusing on the symptoms. Okay. So like I said before, right? And if you define your problem appropriately, most of the time you're going to come up with reasonable solutions for it. Okay. And so start from there and be patient. Don't rush to the solution. Okay. It is also true that sometimes problems can actually be turned into opportunities, right? Something that might actually be seen as a negative. For example, if you're a new firm, right, and you're small and your competitors are large, you don't have a lot of capital, right? So that could be a problem because you might not be able to maybe invest heavily into marketing like maybe your opponent can, right? But you might be able to turn that problem into an opportunity, right? So for example, maybe you don't have the funds to print coupons for your product because it's expensive to do that and distribute them widely. But you can do is you can turn this into a opportunity for you. So for example, what you can say is that you will accept competitors' coupons, right? So you don't need to print anything, and you're still leveraging the fact that your competitors are actually doing something. So you can oftentimes turn a problem into an opportunity. Okay. So how do you come up with the problem? Well, the easy way, which is usually not the right way, right? It's just quickly trying to find the first thing that you identify, right? You start reading, and the author that has written the case with a particular purpose in mind says something like, the main issue is, and it's like, aha, here is the problem, right? And you need to realize that the person that wrote the case did so probably to teach a class, but what was happening at the firm at the time may or may not be induced by whatever problem the person identified, right? So this could be a case of something called framing bias, right? The way a situation is presented to you is going to make you think one way or the other, not because of the facts, but because of the way it is presented, okay? So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to analyze the facts, and based on that, we're going to try to see if we can identify what the problem is. So we're going to list the symptoms, right? We're going to think about them and what could be causing all these symptoms at the same time. And then maybe we're going to be making a statement about what the main problem is, okay? There could also be multiple problems. That is definitely a possibility, okay? But you need to basically break it down, analyze, look at the facts, and try to identify the problem based on that, not what the case says is the main problem, okay? Because that could be just framing. As a student, it would be nice if there is a particular recipe that I can give you, right? So read the first page of the case, then read the last page of the case, then read the whole case again, and then whatever it's left on page 3 is probably what is going to outline the problem. So that would be a very mechanical solution to the problem, and unfortunately that's obviously not the right way to try to find the solution or the problem within a case, okay? And some people, especially people that have a lot of experience, okay, might be able to use intuitive thinking, okay? And that means they've been exposed to a lot of similar problems, and when they see a problem, or by problem I mean a case, right, a situation, they can identify what the key factor is. And that's mostly due to the fact that they've been presented with similar situations in the past. I suspect that this intuitive thinking is not going to work for 99.9% of the people taking this class. The reason why is because you're probably looking at your first full-fledged case in this case, right? So because of that, you have probably not been exposed to a lot of problems like this, and because of this, identifying the main issue right away, it's going to be challenging. Okay, it is definitely challenging for me, and I've been teaching cases for at least 10 years. Okay, good. And then you have what seems to work, and it's kind of messy, which is basically strategic thinking, where what you do is you read the case multiple cases. You're going to be going through the facts. You're going to keep looking back and forth between different facts and tables and try to think about what the key issues are. You're going to put it together. You're going to scratch it 4 times. You're going to go back to it, discuss with some of your teammates. And after doing some thinking is when you're going to kind of come up with some sort of basic idea of what's happening. And based on that, you're going to outline some priorities about what the key issues are. And then you're going to work on finding some sort of solution. It's not pretty. It takes some effort in the beginning. It's kind of a new situation / process for you guys. So it's going to require some time. But the good thing is we're doing experiments with cases instead of with the firm. So you can actually try this process out, and you're going to get better at it as we solve a case after case after case. In this class, we're going to do 11, which will be a good starting point, I suspect, for anybody taking an undergrad class. Okay. So after we have identified what the problem is, right, what are we going to do next? Well, in-house, once that you know the problem, you know the solution, right? Because every doctor knows that when you have malaria, you need to have a certain drug that helps you with it, right? But I'm not going to talk about it because for whatever reason these days it's controversial, right? Because it can potentially maybe treat COVID too, although there's debate on that, right? So what we're going to do after we have the clear problem is try to define what kind of goals or objectives do we want to set. Okay, now what do I mean by a goal? A goal is a concrete and measurable objective that we're going to try to set up. Okay, and you're not going to only set up one goal. It's good that you think in terms of different time frames, right? So you might have some goals for the firm that are going to involve maybe 2 or 3 years because they're going to require maybe the acquisition of new capabilities that you don't have, maybe the development of a new product that requires some technology that is not available off the shelf, right? In situations like that, you're going to be looking at the long term. By the way, the word long term here is also industry specific, right? If you're looking at tech, maybe long term is 2 years. If you're looking at pharma, long term might be 5 or 10 years, right? Because some of the trials to get a drug approved tend to be quite lengthy. Although, for example, with COVID, we have rushed the vaccines and maybe without doing as much testing as we would have done in the past, right? So long term, medium term, and short term are variable. Usually long term, let's say 3 years and higher. Medium term, it will be 1 to 3 years. And immediate or short term, anything under a year. Again, in the tech space, you might want to compress this a little bit, maybe 6 months, a year, and maybe 2 or 3 years. Okay, so, take this with a grain of salt, but you might have to have goals that are specific to the different time frames. Don't only think about the short term, also think about what would you like to do, maybe a little bit down the line. Okay. Also, when you're trying to come up with solutions, and we'll see that later, after you have your goals, make sure that you consider things that seem a little bit hard to achieve, right? The time to beat an idea down is not when you're coming up with it. You will do some analysis later to decide which one of these ideas are actually the most feasible or solid ones. So let's take a concrete example. What about a firm like General Motors, right? General Motors is a company that used to be the market leader if you measure car leadership as industry sales, okay? And right now, General Motors, I think, is third worldwide in terms of overall sales, okay? So they've, lost a little bit of ground there. And also in terms of market share in many markets, they have struggled, okay? So the question is what kind of short-term goals, medium-term goals, and long-term goals we could come up with them, okay? And well, if you read the news and if you've looked at cars lately, one company that has disrupted at least the market in the US and is doing so in other markets as well is Tesla, right? We might talk a little bit about them. Headed by a gentleman called Elon Musk. Maybe you know about him. I hope you do. Right. And Tesla has disrupted the market because it has created a product that is very different than what was traditionally offered, right? It has offered electric vehicles. And it's interesting because if you look at history, General Motors was the first company to sell an electric vehicle in the US, at least in the mass market. Okay, I think it was called EV1, if I remember correctly. It's been a few years, so you might want to take this with a grain of salt. But it didn't use lithium-ion batteries. It used metal hydrate, which are a lot less efficient, and it had very poor range. I don't remember the exact figures, but it was something like 30 or 40 miles. Okay, and it was an absolute disaster. A lot of people came up with all sort of speculations about whether, General Motors was trying to basically boycott their own product because they didn't want, a transition to electricity. I think those are conspiracy theories. If General Motors could have taken the market by storm with a product like Tesla, they would have done so probably, but they didn't. Okay, and even though they were the innovators in this space, Tesla right now, by market capitalization, which is the price of the stock times the number of stocks outstanding, is multiple times larger than General Motors, even though they sell less than 1/10 of the cars that General Motors sells. I want you guys to realize the craziness of that statement, right? So the market thinks that Tesla is going to do a lot better than General Motors. So what can General Motors do? Okay, they have already announced recently that they are going to introduce a number of new electric vehicles. They are relaunching a brand that they killed around the electric vehicles called Hummer. Maybe you've seen them, okay? And they are trying to fight back, right? So now what you're going to have to do is come up with short-term, medium-term, and long-term strategy for them, right? And what kind of objectives can they achieve, right? What kind of market share can they gain? Right now, electric vehicles in the US are about 4% of total sales, so it's a small percentage. But out of those 4%, so out of electric vehicles, which are under 1 million right now per year, I think it's about 1 million. And check the facts because I don't remember. I have bad memory to remember that. More than 85% of all new electric vehicles are Tesla vehicles. So even though the percentage of the total market is small, if you look at electric vehicles as a category, Tesla is smashing it, right? They are by far the largest brand, even though there are a bunch of other brands like Hyundai and Nissan that are trying to compete in this space. And Toyota just announced that they are going to do the same thing in the US. Okay, so everybody seems to be falling in place. The question is how, right? So you're going to have to think in the short term, what can you do? Well, maybe you cannot develop a new car in the short term. Maybe that's more of a medium term strategy, okay? And long term, what are you going to do? Are you going to go beyond electricity? Are there other powertrains that you should be considering? What about fuel cells, right? This is something that 10 years ago, it was touted as, not 10, 20. 20 years ago, it was touted as the future, right? What happened to this, right? Is this where we should go next? Because you still need to plug in the car, right? With fuel cells, you can just put in hydrogen and it's a lot quicker, right? So think about that, right? Now, after we have the problem and we have some objectives that we're trying to achieve, now what? Well, now what you need to do is create at least 2 different actions or set of actions to tackle that goal. Okay, so if you decide that you're trying to launch 5 new cars for General Motors in the next 5 years in the US market that are electric, the question now is how are you going to achieve that goal, right? Are you going to develop your own batteries in-house? Are you going to team up with a supplier like Panasonic or LG Chem, which are going to be able to give you already a lot of this technology off the shelf, right? And what kind of suppliers and what kind of partners do you need to actually think about that will enable you to achieve this goal that you are actually setting forth, right? And if you're going to launch 5 vehicles, what vehicles are they going to be? What segments are you going to be targeting with those vehicles, right? Are they going to be SUVs? Because it seems like in the US market, it's all about SUVs, right? Or are they going to be something more like a smaller vehicle that will maybe benefit more from the electricity, right? And where you need maybe smaller batteries because the car is not so heavy, right? What are you going to do, right? So you're going to come up with alternatives, right? And they could be very different. It could also be not doing electrical cars at all, right? Those are all options, and you should have multiple options on the table that will look quantitatively and qualitatively different, okay? And after we decide on what the alternatives are going to be, at least 2, I would say, to be in good shape, you need 3 so that you can just explore different avenues and opportunities. Then you're going to have to come up with metrics that are going to enable you to evaluate those. Metrics like what? Like potential for sales, maybe profit, okay? You're going to have to make guesses on this, right? But also things like risk, right? Risk could be financial risk. It could be a risk also not being able to achieve certain technological goals if you're developing new technology or new products that are not in the marketplace already, right? What kind of metrics are you going to use to evaluate this? Some option might not be the highest profit, but it might have a lower financial and or technological risk. So You're going to have to come up with a set of metrics, evaluate these options, and based on that, you're going to make a decision and choose a winner. Okay? And then provide a rationale for why that is the best available alternative. And this is the process that we're going to use essentially to solve every single one of the cases. Okay? We're going to start by looking at all the facts of the case, identify what the problem is, or at least try to do that. Maybe we'll require some analysis to try to break down what the underlying causes are for what we are observing, which are the symptoms. Then after that, after we have the problem, we're going to create some goals or objectives that we're trying to achieve to maybe help solve this problem or this issue, okay, or opportunity, if we turn it into an opportunity. Okay. Then after we have those goals, we're going to generate at least 2, but probably more like 3 or 4 alternatives that are going to allow us to take some actions. It could be new products, new marketing campaigns, changes in pricing, changes in distribution, whatever it is, right? Any marketing action that is going to enable us to achieve the goals that we think are reasonable for this, and maybe in the short term or long term, somewhere in between. And then, based on some analysis, decide which one of those is going to be best. Maybe by looking at things like projected sales, or potential profit, or maybe risks associated with it. Okay, that's it.